Great.
Good evening. Welcome to Instructional Design from the Ground Up, where we're going to have so much fun tonight we may have to be reported to some official authorities. But in the meantime, Ashley and Miko and Denise and I are going to talk about gamification. And
Yes.
this is something that I'm really excited to talk about. I brought my Scrabble game and a deck of cards and my putter and my cheesehead from Green Bay. And I know that's exactly what gamification is about, right, Miko?
Yeah, we will discuss elements of the game.
So we're going to have fun tonight. So as you join us, if you join us live, be sure to get into the chat, make yourself known, ask questions, make comments. We don't have Patreon, so you can't pay us tonight. I apologize for that. We'll never have that. But please be part of this. And I think it's going to be fun because so many people are interested in this. And I think there's some misunderstanding, shall we say. I think there's a little bit of misunderstanding, certainly about how to apply it as an instructional designer, but I think just generally conceptually that there's some stuff that people don't connect the dots on. And I have to admit, I'm one of those. I'm certainly not well versed in this. And that's why we have people on here that are actually well versed in these things. So we're going to run through this. Ashley, good evening to you. How are you? Good and good. Miko, I know you're good.
Yeah.
Denise
Uh,
was on vacation last week.
that's right.
And
I'm fresh from Bar Harbor. I've eaten
not
a lot of
Bar
lobster,
Harbor,
and I've
Bar
tried to say
Harbor.
that as best I could without
No,
sounding
no,
too much like I
no,
just came from New England. But hey,
no,
it was
no.
great.
That's not even Rhode Island. I'm not sure
I
what that
know.
is,
I don't know what it is either, but I
but it's
am.
all good.
It is, and I'm super excited because gamification is something that I want to learn more about, and I want to dig into this topic because in the course I'm taking a course right now in my graduate studies, and I am writing a research paper on gamification.
Oh, well,
So
good.
yeah, I
Well, then
started
I don't
digging
have to
into a little
say anything
research.
tonight. I'm not going to
Well,
say anything.
yeah, you might need to
Three of you
step
are going to
in and
carry it, and off you go. So, who wants to pick it up? Miko, you want to give us a framework for this? Because you've got a lot of stuff going with this.
Yeah, well, the first thing that I wanted to share, because that's what people ask me all the time, is if gamification is playing games when you are in the classroom or in instruction, and that's not quite accurate. Digital game-based learning or game-based learning, depending on the format, is when you take an actual game and you bring it to instruction. You align the learning objectives for the class, and you bring a game to have some practice and to do some assessments. Game-based learning or digital game-based learning. Gamification, it's the art, and I will say the art because it's quite complicated to achieve it effectively. Is when you borrow elements of games. You adopt certain features of the game to a non-gaming situation. So let's say that I want to motivate people in a training session that I'm doing, and I give them some rewards, some candy every time I ask a question and they answer correctly or they participate, I give them some candy. That reward system from a game is what we would call gamification.
candy.
That is very interesting. So, Skinner would be very happy with you, right? I mean, this is a whole reward and getting people to think about things through very positive reinforcement. And yeah, yeah. So, Ashley, I know you've done some games, right? You've done gamification at some level.
Very, very low level gamification, yes, but I have some experience. Um, Miko, I like the distinction that you provided in clarifying, what is gamification versus what is using a game to facilitate a learning experience. And so I think I've done a little bit of both in various aspects throughout my career. The game I would say I'm the most proud of is creating a citywide scavenger hunt for my family reunion, though.
Oh, nice.
Very
So
proud of
did,
that.
so did Uncle Pete win? Uncle Pete always wins those.
Yeah, for us it was Uncle Gary. He
Yeah,
definitely
there's
he
it's
brought home
always an
the
uncle,
gold.
right? Oh yeah, that's the dynamics of family reunions. That is so cool. Well, gosh, well Denise, you're writing a paper, so tell us about your paper.
Well, so the topic is really about whether or not, I should say, gamification can increase engagement in specifically an online environment, but also in-person environment. And so our research is really we're researching into what are the challenges of implementing gamification. Does it work? What are the limitations? Things of that sort. And also using it as an assessment, gamification as an assessment, if that's even possible. So we're sort of digging into that. And Miko, what is your take on how it increases engagement?
Yes, sometimes we want to pretend that learners always want to be there. And in some
Yes.
instances, they want to be there because they want to learn. But in some
Yeah.
other instances, such as compliance, when you have to do some trainings for compliance, or you have to teach a gen ed and they have to take it because they have to take it, they really basically have no choice around that. You're going to struggle with that motivation and that engagement. And in those instances, it's very hard to achieve that motivating internally the student. So those external rewards, those additional things that you can give them, can definitely start gaining the attention, start making making them see things differently. That's why it works, because you use an external resource to actually start gaining the attention and to make them see things differently. One of the biggest components of gamifications for me is storytelling. And research has said that when people play games and they spend so many hours attached to that game, hours and hours, it's sometimes because of the story that is happening through the game. So let's say that you have a course that is very dry, that is very hard to understand, or that is compliance in nature. I think one of the best things that you can do is use case based learning, role playing. These are examples of gamification. Create a story that can make people see things in a different way, and also create stories that make the audience shock. You rather have a shocked audience than a bored audience. And that's why gamification can really help you sometimes to move from the external motivator to the internal one, because you can create such a powerful story that even if they started just paying attention to the story because of the way it was engaging, at the end you can portray and convey why your course or your training experience is relevant. So it can really change the perspective in learning.
Ooh, that's powerful. So you talked about storytelling, and kind of reminded me a little bit of my trip up north this week, where we sat around a table and played Monopoly for 4 hours because my uncle had never played Monopoly in his life, and he was really nervous about. He's from Colombia, South America, and they just didn't have that there, and so he was really nervous about, like, I don't know if I'm going to understand this. And so you talked about storytelling using gamification, and it's interesting because he got into this Monopoly game. He won the game, and he was like the king of Monopoly by the time we were finished. And it was because he created this story for himself, and we all got into it. Here he is, a millionaire, billionaire, and he's buying all these properties, and he's like, this is what life, wow, this could be life, this, and he was really getting into it. So I can understand how you start off with maybe hesitancy. Students could be hesitant about getting into this course that they're taking. It's a compliance thing they have to do, blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden you throw this kind of storytelling or gamification device in their way. And now they see it in a different way because now they're putting themselves in that position to be able to feel things. And I think whenever you put emotion into something, it's that much more compelling.
Yeah, I cringe when I see that people struggle with Title IX. Title IX is a must. Nobody wants to do it because it's compliance. They feel that, oh my God, here we go again. And I see that sometimes you miss an opportunity. You can be telling very powerful, shocking, thought provoking stories. That's what I will do for a Title IX training, for instance. My gamification will start with stories and examples of things that can actually happen to them or that they can witness with somebody close to them. And I think when you start shocking the audience like that and they start seeing the connections, how more connected to the issue they are than what they think, you start getting the attention.
Ashley's thinking.
Oh no, well,
You're
yes, I'm
not
always
thinking?
thinking.
Yes, you are. I know you're thinking. I've seen that thing. How many years have I seen that look? I know
Right,
what you're
exactly.
thinking.
Well, I mean, it's what I appreciate about what you're saying, Miko, is that, is really inserting the power of storytelling with the training process. And it's really making me reflect. So maybe I have done gamification before, and I just didn't realize that that was the mechanism that we were using. Because for one position I was in, I actually had to manage the human trafficking training curriculum for the DoD. And instead of, like you're saying, just making it a bunch of boring slides about, here are the characteristics of a trafficked person, the story that was being told, that the audience was inserted into, is one where you are an investigator overseas experiencing, various aspects of working with service members. And it was presented through graphics. So it was kind of like a graphic novel feel. But ultimately, as you progress through the course and completing the exercises, you got certain points, which were essentially the knowledge checks.
Yeah,
Absolutely, yeah.
this is so interesting. And so let me ask you a couple of counterpoints. Can you ever be too clever?
Yes. Wait, who is that question for?
Either of the three of you.
Okay, I'm going to pass
But
to
raise your
Miko
hand.
then.
Raise your hand if you want to answer. So the reason I'm getting to this is because, as probably most of you know, I hate icebreakers. I
Mhm.
absolutely, totally, and completely do not like icebreakers. I do not allow them when people design courses for me. And I think a lot of people look at that as gamification, and I don't believe that's true. Because icebreakers, I think when you ask me what animal I'd be if I could be any animal, and I require some thought and I come up with panther, I'm not sure what that says about me. And I'm not sure that's gamification. I think that's silliness. And I know
Absolutely.
that's not what we're talking about, but I see a lot of confusion about where does the professional side of this stop and where does the silliness side enter into this. And at least for me, and I'm just speaking for me because I just hate icebreakers. I can't tell you how much I dislike them, especially from a design perspective, because they add nothing to the content or the process, because they're never at all related to what you're trying to teach. I've never seen them done well.
But Chuck, do
But
you feel though with icebreakers, because I'm curious about that, if it's done in a way that if it's done for the purpose of getting people comfortable with each other so that they
nope,
can learn together as a community, no?
nope,
So you
nope,
just put a bunch of
not a
strangers
chance.
together. Okay. Well,
Okay, and let me tell you where this came from. Go, my first, I mean, besides my years as a musician, I started a real job. It was with the phone company. And every instructional designer at the phone company had a different icebreaker. And all of them seemed to revolve around what bird would you be? What animal would you be if you could be someone else? And it never had anything to do with what we were learning. Nothing, ever. It never had any connection. So what you would do is you would spend, because some of these groups, you have
Mhm.
15, 20, 30, 40 people in it. So everybody
Yeah.
had to pick an animal or a bird. So, well, I think I'd be an owl because, I like to think about things and I wear glasses. And and then you go around and you listen to 39 other people come up with the same thing. And then you're exhausted. And now we have to sit through the training. And I could go on for hours about this and disagree if you disagree, which is fine. But I want people to be clear the distinction between that kind of silliness and the absolute seriousness and professionalism of doing gamification and adding motivation through storytelling and other things, which is related always to the topic. And I think that's the difference. is that string that relates all of these things to what you want people to show for mastery at the end of whatever you're doing, and not just trying to create community, which I understand, Denise, what you're saying. In the beginning, I kept saying, okay, I'll endure another Al and Panther session because I don't know everybody in this room. But I think there are times when you don't need to know everybody in the room. And I think
Absolutely.
there's times when you don't need to have that particular community building. You could do it through storytelling, right? Everybody tell a story related to this content, especially when you're talking about trafficking and those things. Because, gosh, my experience with trafficking is through the women's shelter here in Berkeley County, and going through that and trying to explain to people what was actually going on and what to look for, and how what you saw was not what was going on. And I mean, we were the first shelter in the state of West Virginia, Maryland, or District of Columbia to have men in there that were trafficked, because that was unheard of. Now, I don't know if you found this a completely different topic area, but the reason I'm going here is I'm saying if you start with storytelling and saying, do you think this story is authentic? And tell a story about a man who's been trafficked, or a boy child that's been trafficked. Because I think most people think about it is in terms of women or something else being trafficked. And certainly that's the majority, but it's not the only group. And trying to get funding for that and doing all that. So if I was going to put together a training for legislators or somebody else that made these decisions on that, I think I would start with stories. I think I would start with what everybody is talking about. And I wouldn't care about creating community. I care about creating atmosphere. And tell me where I'm wrong.
That is a great distinction, what you just said about creating atmosphere.
But
That is
Chuck, I think
powerful.
yeah, you make a really good point. I think it has to go back to alignment. People sometimes create or integrate activities for the sake of thinking that they're fun, just because everybody does them, just because they think people like them. Not true. And
True.
gamification is no different. You have to make sure your gamification is aligned to the overall instruction. That's when it works. And the other thing that's unrelated in a way topic, but that's why I have my issues with this new wave of disruptive pedagogy. I believe that you
Mm,
have to be disruptive, but there's a new wave of people who are taking that to the extreme. They don't
yep.
believe in grades. They want to push active learning. They don't want to consider lecturing a thing. And they take it to the next level. And when I see evaluations for training or teaching, students sometimes don't like to be pushed to do active learning when there's nothing rich out of the active learning activity.
Well, it's like
Sometimes,
the age-old argument between constructivism and behavioralism, right?
yeah,
So for a long time, everybody online wanted to be a constructivist. Just throw a topic out and let everybody talk about it. And,
yeah,
and okay, where's this going to take you? And they'd say, well, everybody gets to discover their own learning. And I'd say, about what?
yeah, exactly. Can you
You
imagine?
know?
I believe some things, some topics, some courses, you can teach that way. But
Yes.
if you're a doctor, I mean, either you know it or not. There's no room for interpretation of what's
No.
the heart doing or where it is. That's not open for interpretation. Either you know it well or not. And sometimes that let's discuss for hours and sessions, and at the end bring it together. It really takes you nowhere. I'm very cautious with this new wave of excessive disruptive pedagogy that doesn't
Well,
consider any traditional IDT process at all.
well, I mean, there's an underpinning of folks that want to get rid of ISD. They don't like it for whatever reason, and that's kind of their background. Their green screen on all of this is they don't like ISD because it works, or they think it's simple, or I've the stuff I've heard. I can't even repeat it. It's so silly. But this whole notion is the farther you go up the professional scale and the farther you go up in the experience scale with designers, what you find is they're not going to waste learners' time with silliness. They're not going to get caught on an ideology or a feeling about this is what we call that and that's no good and all the rest of it. What they do is try to find the best resonant vehicle for taking learning from the content on the continuum to where people can reach mastery. And I've seen these 5 or 6 times now where there's this whole sideshow of cuteness that accomplishes nothing. And I think that's what you're talking about, Miko, is this whole notion of oh, well, I want to stand out from the crowd, so I'm not going to like ISD, or I'm not going to do this, or I'm not going to do that. And it just blows away, and then we get right back where we started. But Ashley, you got something to say, I know.
Well, so on that vein, I just found out about this new wave called learner experience design, which I thought was really interesting, and I read a piece about it that kind of distinguishes learning experience design from instructional design. But what really got me thinking was, if you're, as an instructional designer, if you're not building learning experiences, then what are you doing? Right?
Yeah, I don't get it. I mean, this whole argument about Addie to Sam. Okay, Sam is Addie. You just call it's semantics.
Right.
And why can't we just agree that this is learning? Okay, this is how you design learning.
Yeah.
And if you want to call it that, that's fine. We'll all clap. Now let's get back to work. Uh, I I just think it's the maturation of the field, and you're going to have these offshoots. And well, let's
Right.
discuss them. If there's any merit, of course, we'll think about them. But it all goes back to this. It's like biology. I can't change the core of biology. I can't
Right.
change the core understanding and appreciation of physics. And we are a science. It's a science of learning. And the more people appreciate the fact that I just don't understand why they fight this. I really don't. It's beyond me.
Right. And then to what Miko was saying, I recently took a compliance training, and it was really interesting. And to your point, most of the compliance related training I've had to take throughout my career has been in some way gamified, right? Like, the security protocols, the PII courses throughout the years, they all have that element. But what was interesting about the one that I took recently is that there was no purpose and value to the game.
Thank you.
So there were moments where a button would flash and it would say, "Click here for 3,000 points," and then I'd click it and nothing happened. Like I would just get like more points, and I get that the purpose, in my opinion, was probably to like to make sure someone is looking at the screen, right? But ultimately, what are we doing? Like, I
Yeah.
didn't get a free sticker at the end. I didn't get like a $5 Starbucks gift card. So I'm curious about your thoughts on like how you incentivize games, or what the strategies should be when you're designing something and accruing or totaling points for it.
I think that's a great Miko question.
Well, one of the favorite ones that I have is negative feedback. I like that sense of people having to take care of something that they already have. Research has demonstrated that people tend to care more about something they already have, they don't want to lose it, than having to earn. So let's say that you're teaching a class and you start everybody during the semester with 100 points for attendance. So it's not on them to earn points every time they attend classes. It's on them to make sure they don't lose those points, because by each time they lose the points, you're going to deduct X number of points. In a way, it's the same principle,
Yeah.
but it's that sense of, oh my God, I already have 100 points. I don't want to lose them because they might help me at the end with my final grade. So negative feedback, it's another classic as much as storytelling. And that's perfect for those instances where you cannot use money. That's a whole other conversation, because money, given money, gift cards, rewards cards, are part of the gamification conversation, and many people don't like it. But I have to be honest, money talks. I understand that in a
Yeah.
classroom you might not do that, but in the corporate trading world, if the company has the budget, giving some sort of reward like that connected to money can definitely increase the motivation when it's not happening internally. But then gamification for higher education or K-12 has to be different. So the negative point system, badges, badging is a great technique that people really like, having to earn those badges for specific skills, having leaderboards. Nobody wants to be the last one in class. And leaderboards are even more enjoyable if you put them in teams, because you don't want to single out somebody by performance. But if you divide a class in teams and they have challenges, missions, tasks, those are other examples of gamification, you can rank them in that leaderboard throughout the weeks. And there is something about you that, hey, I don't want my group to be the last one every week. I want to next week see us in the second or the first place. So that internal motivation starts getting the learner to the point that they care a lot about the class or the content of the training.
So it's that competition factor that people really, it makes them thrive. I mean, I know I am super competitive. So when
No.
you start giving
Oh,
badges and
Denise.
like
No.
rewards that I want, like things I really
Oh,
want, I'm like
Denise.
all in, and I'm super competitive when it comes to that kind of stuff. Really
So all
am.
three of you have taken my classes. And what
Yeah.
was the grading system?
I feel like it was negative feedback where like you start with X
Uh,
amount
so if
and
you
then
took me in the classroom, what did I tell you the first night? Everybody in here is going to get an A.
Yes,
Did I not say that?
you did.
And in
yes,
my
that was
online
right.
courses, I give you 100 points. You have an A.
Yeah,
The only way you will not keep this A is if you don't follow these rules,
Right.
Hmm. So
right.
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Every
Mm-hmm.
course you took with me is like that because
Mm-hmm.
for that very reason, I don't want them to be part of the issue. I
Hmm.
don't want you to have to build something. I want you to have to be careful to keep something. And
Mm-hmm.
Miko, I'm just thrilled that you even brought that up because I hadn't thought of it for a while because it's just so ingrained in how I teach that I just do it automatically now. But it's interesting that you would bring that up. So I guess I feel good. I was so many generations ahead.
Yeah.
Wow.
You honestly,
I'm,
you were ahead of
yeah,
the game. And the
I'm
same
just
thing
going to sit
happens.
here and just smile for the rest of the how much time we got? Okay, I'm going to do 30 minutes of smiling because I feel so good.
Well,
No,
it's fun.
that's true.
It's funny because you bring up the grading system, and I'm taking a course right now, a graduate course. And what I love about this is I love being able to go in at the end of the week and see like 3 out of 3 points. Did I get 3 out of 3 points? I did, yes. Like I actually get really excited about that. Did I
Yeah.
get 10 out of 10 points for that? I did. And I get to see every week how I'm doing and how I'm progressing. And that actually feeds my motivation because I would be devastated if I saw 1 out of 3. Like, what? Oh my God, like what am I doing wrong? I'd have to step up my game because it's that competitive nature in me. And
But let me ask you this because that's a good point. I don't give points. I don't grade. I don't grade.
right.
You all three know that. I don't grade. You start off with an A, and the only reason you would not get an A is because something you did. And if you lose points, I will email you and tell you that. I would never post it or do anything because that's just my philosophy on community. But I don't do that. So, Denise, how did you feel? How was it different for
Yes.
you?
Well, what's different the way you taught or the way you teach is you give feedback, which is another form of
Yeah,
reward.
the
So
thousands of
I
words. Yeah.
crave feedback because I want to know, okay, what am I
Okay.
doing? Am I doing this correctly? And you always give very truthful feedback. So if I'm missing the mark on something, I'm told that, and okay, I understand it now. So now I can improve that process. And that to me is another form of reward
But I don't
because,
take points away.
and
See,
that,
and that's the difference
yeah,
in my philosophy too. And we're getting into grading, which is kind of off topic, but I think it's important because it all lines up together with this notion of how do we create community, how do we create interest, how do we take away things that are negatives in this environment, and how do we accentuate the positive. So I am brutal with my feedback, but you get lots of it, and it doesn't cost you any points. So
right.
even if something you post is horrible, you'll still get credit because you did the best you could do. And I think in most of the courses I teach, that's an authentic way to do it. But I also hear you saying, Denise, that you like instant gratification. So do I need to define
I
my
like the best
feedback
of
the
both. I
same
like
as points? This is interesting. And
well, your
Ashley
but
and Miko are sitting there like,
your
what's he talking
feedback,
about?
but your feedback is instant gratification. Because in this
Okay.
other course I'm taking, I don't get that feedback. I get the points, and that
Well,
tells
which would
me
you rather have?
Well,
The
Because
post.
I
I
know
would say
instructors that
feedback.
go through, there's instructors that go through and award points to everybody. They don't want to take the time to
Yeah,
read it. They don't want to take the time to.
I
I mean,
would
how
say
many times do
feedback.
you get the level of feedback that I give? I don't think
I
you get it
haven't
often.
yet. No, I have not.
And that's, it's 10 times the work for me
Yeah.
to do the feedback instead of just awarding points and off you go. I can get a grad student to grade stuff. I don't think that's the way to do it. I want you to have very detailed feedback on your work and not worry about what your score is.
Right. Yeah.
So, Miko,
I,
you're thinking now. It's brewing in there. I could see it.
Well, it's because the games, when you're playing a game, feedback happens all the time. When you do the wrong thing and you lose a point,
Instant,
that's a way of
instant.
feedback. When you cannot move forward because that's feedback, you're doing something wrong. So you have to rethink the strategy. When you're losing all your properties, going back to Denise's examples of Monopoly, that's feedback that I have to do something. Either I build an alliance or I learn to count or I need to buy better properties. That's why
Okay.
games.
all of the above.
Yeah,
Okay. So let me
yeah.
ask you that. I'm going to put my professor hat on. Where does that come from?
The feedback.
When is that whole notion of rewarding instantly? And go back, if you don't have the book, if you do, look in chapter 1. It
Yeah,
is,
I, I
it
I
is,
know where you're coming from. That goes back to behaviorism. That's
it behavior.
automatic.
And what part of it? Machine learning,
Mhm.
right? We have matured machine learning from
Yeah.
the point of, you know, if you're a turtle, you get a acorn. I don't, whatever they did with that craziness. But you got instant feedback, right? And
Mhm.
you could not go farther. I mean, you can modify it the same way you want to, but the original concept was that you had to answer it correctly. You knew instantly whether you answered it correctly, and you could only move forward if you answered it correctly.
Yeah.
Did I say that 7 times? So, but isn't it interesting how we have evolved these supposedly archaic ISD principles and foundational theories, which we have proven now to be true, and brought them into the age of gamification and all these other things. And all we have to do is think about their particular application with their whatever technology or notions of what we're going to learn with and use. And this is where I keep going back to this notion on ISD. This stuff is all here. It's always been here. It's how
Yep.
we take it and use it. So if I can take machine learning and turn it into a very postmodern way to design and teach, then I'm going to feel pretty good about that.
So, taking it back to gamification, my question, one of the big questions that I have right now is when do you use it? Like, do you use it always? Is this something that you always throw into? How do you know when to actually include this in a design plan?
Oh, great question. Well, there are many ways. The first one I will say it's to gain attention. Sometimes you're walking into a classroom and students are on the phones, and it's really hard to bring them together, or you know that they don't want to be there. There's a tool that I use called Mentimeter. I'm sure you have heard of that. It's free, and I use it a lot for gamification. You can ask questions, create a mini quiz or a little survey, and you can start your class asking. Let's say that you assign chapter 3 for the reading of that day, and you want a way to start that class, to gain that attention, to bring everybody and to warm things up, you can ask a couple questions and it will show a leaderboard of the names or the groups or a global survey, and you can see right away through a little game component that people were lost, that people maybe didn't read, or actually everybody read. So when you want to test, check for understanding, gamification is good. When you want to gain attention, is good as well. When you want to bring the best out of people, gamification is great because I know that not everybody thrives with competition, but in large numbers, competition brings the best out of people. When you are on a comfort zone and comfortable, sometimes the best of you doesn't come out. But when you have this competition with teams and you want to improve that performance, that competition between teams can be really, really good. So we have competition to foster competition, to gain attention. You also want it, as I said, to make sure you check for understanding. Through storytelling, you can use the gamification to relate. You can have avatars, you can have stories that makes the learners relate to the content. Sometimes we don't care about the content as learners because we think that will never happen to us. or that person doesn't look like me, or why should I care about that? But a story with the avatars, a role playing, can really build that relatability
What
that
is
translates into an internal motivation for learning.
what was the name of the tool or the website that you said at first that you use?
Mentimeter, Mentimeter. Yeah,
Mentimeter. Okay.
yeah,
Ashley's
people
got a
really like
question.
it. Yeah, yeah, Ashley.
Yeah. So then, how would you distinguish, or what would you say are like the biggest differences between real world scenario based learning and gamification? Or is
Yeah.
one just like an outreach source of the other?
Well, the gamification can be something connected to fantasy. Can be a whole fairy tale that you develop. Can be a magical world because again, those stories engage. In real life settings, you have to really be very knowledgeable about the realities of the dilemma or the instructional situation you're building. With
Right.
gamification, you don't have to worry necessarily about that, but obviously there's some overlapping. You can use gamification to enhance real-based, case-based learning. And in many instances, what happens is like you basically reward the behavior for them demonstrating the right thing, or students can get feedback. Gamification, it's a way of getting feedback as well. When you have a system in place, and when they do the wrong thing, or when they answer the wrong thing, or when they answer the right thing, you can have a feedback system, and that's something that sometimes we don't have in real based learning. So that's why gamification can be a little more fun, because gamification is about the game system that you build, those elements. Real world versus learning, you don't necessarily need that.
Yeah. I like that. Thank you.
So
Yeah.
let me
Absolutely.
take us a step farther. So the psychology professor in me wants to ask you, do you think it's better to challenge learners or put them in a safe spot?
Chuck, by the way, I'm gonna answer, but I have to say I feel like I'm passing my defense again for PhD. I'm a little, I'm glad I have some coffee here.
See, because
I'm
this,
just
this is the thing that I get all the time when I talk about learning styles is learners have to feel comfortable. If they don't feel
now,
comfortable
they have to be challenged. You have to challenge your audience. You have to
every
challenge
time,
you have to. You
every
lose them.
time.
You lose them if you don't challenge them. And this is something that I tell my team. Instruction is a beautiful opportunity to take a risk. I love to take risks.
That's a
And
nice way of
looking
putting
back
it.
at the things that I have done in instruction, the risks that I take is basically through storytelling. A little anecdote: a couple years ago, almost 10 years ago, I had to develop an online constructivist learning experience, a tutorial about academic integrity. And I found a video. I'm not really gonna talk about the video. Even for today's standards, we have come a long way. But even for today, it can be quite scandalous or controversial. And I remember I was tired. And when found that video, I was like, Jesus, that woke me up. So I was like, can you imagine what this will do to a learner? So, but
Hmm.
I was like, well, this might be too much at the same time I thought. And I was like, what the heck? Let's do it.
And how'd it
And
turn out? Turned out great.
great, because that really
Yeah,
shocked, but in a thought-provoking way. And
yeah,
that's learning.
yeah,
Learning is never about being comfortable. You don't grow not only as a learner, but as a person if you do the
yeah.
same things in a safe way. Learning sometimes is difficult. Learning sometimes is controversial. Learning sometimes can shake you to your core. And actually, when you get that shake to your core, that you actually change your behavior because of that shaking,
That's
that's
right.
when learning is effective. And gamification is a great tool for that.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. And I think more designers need to take risks. And there's a difference between respect and pushing someone in sense of them learning to challenge them. You can always be respectful and you always should be. And how you put the learning around this is important. But that doesn't mean that you can't be challenged in terms of your beliefs or your actions or your knowledge base. And I think, especially with adults, I think it's almost a disservice not to challenge them
Mhm.
because let's be honest, most of what adults do is mandated. And if you're going to be mandated to do something, then I think you need to be challenged. I think you need to, okay, if I'm going to invest this amount of time as an adult, I want to walk out of this with something. If all I'm going to do is sit here and shoot hoops for this amount of time, then why do we even do this? What's the point of it?
Exactly. Exactly. And I think for a lot of people, I'm not going to say it's, junior instructional designers, but I've seen this in a lot of different places where the common trip up that a lot of instructional designers fall flat on their faces with is either, like you're saying, creating a safe space where your learners are just memorizing stuff and not actually understanding the behavior change that we want to create, or they go to the extreme where they're trying to actually trick their learner.
Mhm.
And that, I think,
But
and this is the interesting thing about learner experience design versus instructional design that I thought was so surprising that they would distinguish it this way. But, and this is something you and I talked about, Chuck, on one of the previous recordings, is that I, as the designer, need to be thinking through how my learner is going to feel taking this course. And to Miko's point about creating a story or a situation that shocks your learner, you're really going to create something that sticks to their ribs, as opposed to just like, I've clicked through all of these slides, I gained X amount of meaningless points that will give me nothing. you know, and like I've triggered a completion, but what do I really know about how to protect something, or, ultimately achieving the end goal, which is a change in behavior?
and I
Yeah.
think this goes right back to Robert Gagne and the 9 events of instruction and what happened in the 60s with
I
instructional
knew you were going to
design.
bring that up.
But it's the point. So whether you use 9 events to construct a lesson or not is immaterial. But the point is you need to get the 9 things done. And the first of those 9 is gaining attention. And gaining attention means you grab a learner and shake them until they come into the sphere of learning. The externals they brought with them or the misinformation or anything else, that you've now created this safe spot for learning. But a safe spot for learning does not mean you can't be challenged and that you can't be asked to do your better work because we're now at a higher level of expectation. And I think therein lies the drag with all of this for some people. They don't appreciate the fact that learning is a process. And first part of learning is to be able to get people to focus on something. And if you don't do that in a meaningful way that applies directly to the content and what you're trying to accomplish, then all you're doing is playing games, and it's not gamification. You're
Absolutely.
wasting people's time.
Mhm. And people know it and people resent it. That's the thing that I want people to
Yeah,
understand.
well,
Learners resent. And that's why you hear people saying, oh my God, but that was just a lecture. There's nothing wrong with lecturing. People sit
nothing.
through a movie of 3 hours, through a baseball game of how many hours, a football game. People sit through those and nobody will move them from their seat. Why? Because they're engaged. So that's a
Mhm.
myth that you have to be playing meaningless games, or this pair thing share, which is good, but sometimes it's excessively and takes you nowhere. That the learner really resents when they feel that they spent a whole hour with a knowledgeable instructor and they left just with comments and feedback from peers that really didn't change their
Right.
behavior. People really resent that.
Absolutely.
And I
Absolutely.
think this goes to the idea of safe classroom. I think we are confounding things. For me, the idea of providing a safe learning experience means respect, means that you're safe to give an opinion and nobody can condemn you for saying something. I mean, as long as you're respectful. And I think it's that safe, collaborative space for you to feel that you belong to a community and you're not going to be penalized for being honest. That's safe. You're not going to be discriminated in that space, but that doesn't mean that risk should not be taken in
Right.
instruction. Yeah. So.
I was
Well,
going to say that, like, another aspect of creating that safe environment is one where the consequences are controlled, right? Like the
Mhm.
consequences of your actions as you go through a game or you go through an experience are in a controlled environment, that, you're not going to push send on something that goes out to your entire network. but will ultimately teach you how to like live through those experiences.
Absolutely, yeah, I agree.
So, Miko, one of my biggest fears, I think, as a new instructional designer, is creating gamification that sucks. Just to put it bluntly, I don't want to waste people's time or
Well,
make them
I
feel
think
like,
all of us share that.
well, so how, like, where would someone like, where would someone who was new to even considering gamification, where would they go to learn more about how to add gamification into their curriculum? I mean, do you have resources that you could point us to, or something where we could learn a little bit more about this?
Absolutely. I mean, where you want to start? There's so many books, articles. I think using Google will bring you to lots of free resources. I'm happy to share afterwards. Maybe there could be
Hmm.
links that I can share for that. I'll be happy to do that.
Perfect.
But I always tell people, start thinking about the games that you enjoy. Start thinking what elements of that game that you enjoy really stick to you more. And the next thing is start thinking about the end goal for your instruction. What is the one thing that you want your learners to be able to do? Once you start thinking about that, you make the connections. And then a third point is challenges. What challenges am I having in instruction? Is it that people are bored? Is it that people don't read? Is it that people don't come to class? Because if it's that people are bored, then you're going to have the rewards, little games, leaderboards that badges people can get. If they are, let's say, not reading the materials, you can do that little check for understanding games at the beginning of classes or through the instruction. If people are not attending classes, then you might want to do that 100 point that you lose every time you don't come to class. If you're doing compliance, and the challenge is like people hate the fact that they have to come to you once a year for the same topic, then start telling more shocking stories about the consequences that can happen with certain topics, and maybe ask for a budget to give them a Kroger or a grocery store gift card. I'm telling you, if you get everybody $200 to grocery shop, they will not have a problem to go on a Friday afternoon to any training session that you want to. My school is giving $100 for students to get vaccinated, plus another. It's like $200 or 150. It's a good package that they're doing for the first time. I wish I had that when I got my vaccine voluntarily, but I wish they were offering that at that moment. So gamification is part of our lives. Even when you drive, every time you earn points against your license, that's a mechanism for you not to do the wrong thing. Because if I'm like, oh my god, I already have 3 points,
Is
that's
this a
gonna get,
confession, Miko?
no, no, no. I have, I have a very clean driving record, even though people question my driving.
He's
But
just
see, that's
imagining what it
evidence
would
of.
what it would do.
I have a friend that has all kinds of points.
No, I always rub it in because people sometimes question. That's a confession that I'm gonna make. People question my driving style, and I'm like, hush, I have no points. Never been in a car accident, no points. The end.
Oh, at
The
least you
end.
don't drop
So,
like an ex-cop like I do. I mean, anything's better than what I do. Good gracious.
but that's a
So,
gamification mechanism, absolutely. So start thinking about these daily situations and how those gamification instances play a role in your life. Be very careful when you see a cop. Why? Because you can get those points against your driving. So start thinking when you go to Starbucks and you get the excitement because you're earning points, and then you can have a free coffee at the end. Maybe that's something that you can do in your class. Every time your students have a little mission, you can give them a mission. Like, hey, go to chapter 3. I want you to find this thing in particular. And you can have missions throughout the semester. At the end, you can allow them to drop the lowest score on a test or not to take another exam.
yeah.
So those are things that you can do in the classroom. And the content, it's aligned because throughout the whole card that they're filling up, the content of those missions is connected to the classroom. So they're demonstrating and already working through knowledge. It's not like a random activity of points, like 3,000 points, just like that. Like you gave the missions, specific missions connected to the content. And at the end, you can find a mechanism to reward them for being so committed.
Well, see, I think this is this is one of the points of maturation in education and training and instructional design that we are now taking down the curtain of sanctity around what were all of these temples of learning that have existed, right? So this whole notion of we can't really reward anybody because that would cheapen it, or we can't do this or we can't do that. And new age design and new age education and new age training is about finding the most efficient and effective way to do something. And if it
Right.
doesn't fit in your old vocabulary and way to define these things, maybe then you should step back and let somebody else come in and try it. Because these lines are disappearing every day. And the more they disappear, and the more we have challenges to this sanctum sanctorum of things that everybody believed, then you start to look at what's really going on. And what's really going on is you can call this a business or you can not call it a business. But we're all in the business of getting people to learn. We want people to take this information and do something useful with it. We want them to reach mastery. You call that anything you want to. But if I find that I can motivate people in one way or another and it's genuine and authentic and works, then tell me why I can't do that.
I think
Absolutely.
Ashley had something to say there too.
Oh, I love everything that Chuck said, first of
Yeah.
all. But I did have a question for Miko in terms of gamification of LMSs. Like what are your thoughts around gamifying a learning management system and how someone moves through that? Because I'm seeing more instances of that as opposed to just gamifying a course.
Absolutely. When you have a game and you divide the game and you know that you have 7 levels and each level gets better, basically you have this sense that you're becoming a pro because level 1, okay, I'm done, I pass, I'm ready for level 2, then I pass. So it's a mechanism for self accomplishment when you see yourself going through all the levels, but at the same time, it's a mechanism for self regulation. You know that I have to go through 7, I'm already going to 3, so I need, 4 more. So you can put the content in such a way that learners cannot move to the next chunk until certain conditions are met. And you can even create a little pathway of learning and maybe some mini badges along the way that they can earn or mini stars, and then at the very end when they go through the whole experience they get that big badge. But the gamification will be more about knowing that I need to master A before I go to B and then before I go to C, and also to know that hey, I'm making this much progress but maybe I'm behind and I need to manage my time better. So it's the same principle with games. When you see the big picture and you see yourself starting, you get that sense of accomplishment as you move up in the game, but also you are aware of how much you have left. And I think in learning, learners want to know that they want to see the big picture and they want to know where they are exactly, how far they are from mastery, how far they are from that A, and gamification for the LMS helps you with that.
That's terrific.
It,
And
it
what I think we're hearing is that any of you think you're stuck in a rut being a designer, you need to reach out. You need to think about these different things. You need to not be afraid to do creative things. You need to look at experts that think about this, think about Miko and Ashley, and think about Denise's experience with her research and how she learns best. And look at your population and come up with something that's creative that, once again, our role in the world is to get people to mastery. That's what we do. And how we get there can be 1,000 different ways. And don't get caught in the old days and the old ways. Sometimes it works well. Sometimes it works better than something else. But there's a whole new population of learners out there that have learned things differently. We have social media. We have the internet. We have all these things, and that's all they've ever known. And they're comfortable with that. And they like games because Xboxes and PS5s or whatever they're at now sell by the millions because people like to follow a story and learn while they're doing that. So that's why gamers make great programmers. And it's because of a story. And if you think about programming, programming is a story. You start out with line 1 and get to whatever you complete. And same with instructional design. So I'd like to hear from each of you. We're kind of at our time now, but let's go around and just kind of what's the wrap on this? I mean, gosh, let's start with you, Denise, because you're doing
Hmm.
this research and you're kind of sticking your toes in here.
Hmm.
What's all this saying to you?
Well, it's interesting. So I never thought of gamification. Miko just said something when you were talking about the LMS system and how learners like to know that they're reaching mastery and that where they're coming, where they've been and where they're going. And it reminds me of this app that I use to learn how to play my piano. It's called Musician. And I never really looked at it as a gamification, but it is because it's everything you just described. And I get excited when I see 3 gold stars. If I see 3 white stars, I'm like, let me try that again so I could master that. And it's all playing into that psyche of, well, for me, the competitive psyche of, I want to see 3 gold stars, not 3 white stars. And until I see those, I'm not going to feel like I've really mastered what I want to, how I want to master it. So even though the game would allow me to move forward on the 3 white stars, I personally want to see 3 gold. So I'm just going to keep working it till I see it. And it helps you to gain that mastery. And I never really looked at musician that way until now, to be honest with you. It seems silly to say that, but I have not looked at it that way. And now when I go into my musician app, I'm going to be thinking of it as gamification, and it's helping me to learn the art of playing the piano. And so I'm really excited, but I feel a little intimidated by the whole adding gamification principles into design because I'm unfamiliar with how to do that, but I feel more confident after having this conversation. And I look forward to some of those resources. And I think that somebody in Bola is saying the same thing, that Bola was feeling the same way. So I really do feel there's so much opportunity when it comes to it. And it excites me because I do like to learn that way through gamification. Never realized it before till we had this
Well, there
conversation.
you are. You're a gamer.
I guess I am. I never thought of myself. I played Miss Pac-Man growing up, but that was about the extent of it.
I need to talk to Hector. You're now a gamer. Miss Ashley, what are you thinking? I look at there's so much going on behind those eyes.
There really is. Like, I actually have a whole notebook that I've been taking. I've based off this conversation, I've already like created the bare bone structure of how I want to gamify some things. So thank you. Yeah, there's a lot going on back here. Uh, unlike so kind of like the flip side of Denise, I feel like you're saying more excited, but mostly because I realize that I've done a lot more gamification than I
Okay.
that I previously said. I was developing cyber range games essentially for cybersecurity professionals in my past role. And now I'm seeing all these different ways opening up to me about how we can be designing courses in the current organization I represent to really drive that storytelling aspect, right? We're all about pushing use cases and explaining the value through these use cases, but why aren't we creating courses based on that structure as opposed to just presenting information? So I'm really excited about that. And you know, this conversation has kind of made my understanding of gamifying a LMS more digestible.
Mhm.
So thank you, Miko, for your expertise. This has been very helpful.
Well,
Anytime. It
and
has been a great conversation.
well,
Yeah.
Dr. Miko, you get to cap this. What do you think?
Well, I will say that gamification is not really that new. Somebody recently coined the term, but many instructors and many of you have been doing it for quite some time. Maybe you were not aware. And
Hmm.
that's the first thing that I want you to put in your mind, that you have been doing some sort of gamification. You have experienced gamification, even though people didn't call it that. And I believe that as instructors and instructional designers, and I always say this on a daily basis, at least once, sometimes you have to take a risk. The learners that we're dealing with are learners that come prepared with more questions, more curiosity, more access to technology. So we have to leverage that in instruction, and gamification will allow you to do that. Start with something simple. You don't have to create a whole gamify experience for a whole course, but maybe one of your lessons, 1 week out of the whole class, use something from the points that we discussed today just to see the reaction. And that will get to know your audience, and then you will know what things can work or not work for you. Every audience is very different. There is not a magical recipe for implementing gamification across all disciplines, and you have to test the waters by yourself. You have to take the challenge, the risk, but the most important thing is to put always the learner in your mind, the end goal, what you want the learner to be able to do, and how this gamification is to impact them, because that's when you will have the answers for your questions. Think about those two things, and you will see that the possibilities are endless. So thank you so much for the invitation. This has been a great conversation. Always happy to chat with all of you. So thanks.
Well, we're happy you're with us. And for those that are with us and see this after post-production, every first and third Tuesday of the month, we will be here live. You're going to see the three of us, the four of us, sometimes the two of us, depending on who can make it. But we now have two regulars with Denise and I, and Miko and Ashley, and we are so grateful for that. So we will be having lots of these conversations. I hope that this poked at you a little bit. It starts to poke to me. I'm going to get off here and think about this a little bit too. I think this is so fascinating, and I think, Miko, you're exactly right that people have been doing this and haven't put a name on it. And I think that's true with almost everything in instructional design, that it's there. It's just been called one thing or another. We didn't even give it a name. And actually, for you to think about it in terms of your LMS implementations, and Denise with your research, and you're putting your toe in all of this, I think that you can see that what we're trying to do with this channel and what we're trying to do with this effort is to bring new ideas and new energy into the field of instructional design, so that new instructional designers and even veteran instructional designers can take a peek and maybe come up with a new idea or something to think about in a different way. So if you feel that this is of value to you, if you haven't subscribed, we would appreciate that. And just to be clear with everybody, this is not a monetized channel. We do not have a Patreon. This is simply an act of love from the four of us to give back to our field and into the things that we think are important in instructional design. So we appreciate you being with us. We hope you'll join us often as you can. You can look at the other 7,000 videos on the channel, find something that interests you. And certainly we would like to hear from you in terms of topics. If there's something that we haven't covered yet that you would like us to cover, either email one of us or give us a note somewhere here, and we will follow up on it. So from the four of us, we wish you the best, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks so much for being here.